This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
What is going on, everybody? It's another Friday on the calendar, and we have officially entered the month of March Madness. It's been a mad week in the world of pro wrestling, with people still going crazy over this John Cena heel turn. You know, I always joke to myself about how wrestling fans have borderline personality disorder. Like, 1 minute they're griping and moaning about how bad things are, how WWE is doing a horrible job creatively, and things are so lame with the product. And then boom, something big happens. And then everyone immediately changes their mind. They're like, oh God, this is so great. Triple H is the best booker of all time. Ah. Meanwhile, I'm just the dude that sits in the background laughing, just waiting for everything to get screwed up. Because evidently it does. I don't know. I might revisit the John Cena conversation before Mania, because I've had a lot of other things that came to mind after I recorded that Elimination Chamber recap. You know, things I didn't address in the video that I think should be noted. But I'll save that for like a Monday show when we don't have so much stuff going on. Today we got a lot going on. Classic wrestling here on the Friday show. You got WCW, Midsouth, and world-class coverage to get into. And as always, if you're somebody new to the Five Starr Wrestling Report, be sure to subscribe, comment, and give the show a like for me. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble, Mondays and Fridays to tell you like it is. Sometimes those opinions are controversial, but I always strive to be as plain and objective as I possibly can. It's not easy, but I don't like to overpromise and then underdeliver. I've had way too many instances with wrestling over the years where, you know, the bar is set so high from the onset, and then things end up becoming a letdown when the actual payoff occurs. There's a 50-plus year history of that happening in pro wrestling. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, just because things might look promising at the moment. I always hate the argument when people say, oh, you got to let it play out. Well, in this particular case, the whole John Cena turn and whatever's about to happen with him and Rock as a power couple, potentially working as the top heel champion through a good chunk of 2025. I want to see how this plays out before I try to jump to any conclusions. It could be one of the best things that we've seen in WWE in decades. Or it could wind up being one massive giant disappointment. And if I know anything about WWE history, disappointment is that company's motto. But again, I'll touch more on that in the coming weeks, once I gather all my thoughts and figure out how to even expand on what I already covered on Monday. Because I talked about a lot. Still a couple details that I want to flesh out. For now, let's talk about this NWA show. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. It's getting worse, folks. It's getting a whole lot worse. We are now reaching the point with the booking here in 1989 where, I mean, things have already gone off the rails. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But now that we're kind of in this post-nostalgia phase of talking about the Flair-Steamboat feud, we're getting a little more red-pilled when it comes to the reality of what's actually happening elsewhere on the show. It's not good. You know, I think the big thing that stands out to me about the product from around this time, you know, people often complain about incomplete storylines in pro wrestling, where they'll start something and then it'll get dropped for one reason or another, usually because the booker or promoter is recognizing that the feud's not getting over. And then you have other cases where injuries happen, guys leave the territory, a whole laundry list of why things don't pan out the way they should. But if I had to sum up the main standout with WCW here in the early spring of '89, it's realizing how stop and start a lot of things are. This is just a very weird, strange time for the company. Whether it's the Hiro Matsuda thing with the Horsemen, them kind of shoehorning him into the J.J. Dillon role after he left, the whole Midnight versus Midnight fiasco that didn't go according to plan. You've had a lot of the Crockett old guard getting replaced with this crop of newer talent that's been showing up recently. But like, you notice how people are just randomly showing up and don't have any real discernible direction? Whether it's Butch Reed or JYD or Michael Hayes. I mean, nothing against those guys personally, but they're just on the show. And meanwhile, you got the Iron Sheiks and the Dan Spivies of the world showing up. You're like, oh God, it's getting uglier by the minute. Again, it's just a very weird time for the NWA. And the more I go back and watch a lot of these post-Crockett episodes, that slow transition into the Ted Turner, Jim Herd era, it is crazy to think just how swiftly things changed in less than a year. And this is before they went through their 47 booking committee personnel changes. Even this opener is a prime example of, let's just throw dudes out on the show and get them on camera. It's Rick Steiner and Eddie Gilbert versus Rip Morgan and Mike Thor. By the way, the camera quality sucked this week. I don't know what the hell they were doing with the old network when they were post-producing a lot of this old footage. Someone completely overlooked this episode. I mean, yeah, there's something to be said about the appeal of watching the old grainy footage of territory tapes. I mean, this one didn't even look grainy. Just looked like they forgot to turn the autofocus on. Going back to what I was saying, though, you got Rick Steiner coming off recently losing the TV title back to Mike Rotunda at the Chi-Town Rumble. Eddie's been, for all intents and purposes, a dude on the roster for the last several months. I mean, the guy's been bounced around like a pinball from feud to feud to feud to feud. He was doing stuff with Jimmy Garvin that never really went anywhere. Then he was just randomly back to teaming with Ron Simmons, and that basically led to nothing. Then he was just floating around aimlessly as a singles guy until they booked him in that big TV match with Steamboat to face Wyndham and Flair. But, like, there's no consistency with him. Like, just last week, they brought Missy Hyatt back, which, again, I'm pretty sure that just ends up fizzling out by the time the summer rolls around. Because she's going to end up becoming Rick and Scott's manager. I mean, not to get hung up on the booking here, but it really is the big thing that hits me when I watch the product. Everything is just leaping and pinballing from one thing to the next. It was a fun little tag match. If not for anything, watching Rick Steiner fuck around with Mike Thor for most of it. There's a spot where he goes to hoist up Thor into an over-the-shoulder backbreaker. Like, he's about to do the thing where he runs with the guy and then rams him into the corner turnbuckle while he's upside down. Right before Steiner was about to start running, he ends up backing toward the ropes, and you see Thor try to lock his feet under the ropes. And I'm sitting there like, what in the hell is this idiot thinking? Thank God he let go, because I don't even want to imagine how that would have ended if Steiner had taken off. He may have legitimately dropped the guy on his head and killed him. It is still kind of odd seeing Rip Morgan being used as fodder when he was just walking around as the flag bearer for the sheep herders like 3 or 4 months ago. But he really didn't do much here. In fact, he actually got some heat on Eddie for a minute or two. So at least he wasn't a total geek. Steiner ended up whiffing a left arm clothesline on Thor. And then Eddie hit the hot shot for the pin. At least Mike Thor didn't fuck up the bump like the other job guy did the other week. And then we came back for an Iron Sheik promo, as well as a demonstration of sorts, which I'll talk about in a sec. Well, first he referred to Jim Ross as, quote, Mr. Ring Announcer. So at least he was polite about it. He talked very briefly about his culture and then started speaking in Persian. I think it was Persian. Or do we just say he was speaking Iranian? I don't know Middle Eastern culture all too well, nor do I really give a fuck about that piss poor part of the world. Anyway, he hands his flag to JR, who point blank just says, I don't really feel comfortable holding this on television. Can't blame the guy. And then Sheik did a brief workout session with his Iranian dumbbells in order to show off his strength. And then I think he challenged anyone to come try and replicate his workout routine to see if they can match his power. And, well, albeit it wasn't offensive to watch. What was offensive, however, was having to watch the Iron Sheik wrestle. Mostly because of the fact that I had to look at his giant beer gut the whole time. And like, for anybody that's actually ever seen pictures of the Iron Sheik when he had the 12-pack abs or whatever, way early on in his career when he was in great physical shape, seeing him here in 1989 in that condition, God, it just makes you sad. I mean, the only redeeming part about this was the spot where Sheik threw Cougar J out to the floor like a lawn dart, which was literally just Cougar J taking his own bump. The rest of it was god-awfully horrendous. Sheik could barely move. He looked like he was in physical pain just trying to apply his camel clutch hold. Like, think about how bad that is. He was so horrible in his return here. Even WCW was like, you know what? Fuck whatever initial plans we had for the guy. Let's just pay him to sit at home and wait for his contract to run out. In approximately 2 years, because we accidentally let the first contract roll over. Because we're morons. Yeah, this was hideous. And then we returned for the official debut of The Danger Zone. And of course, for anybody that doesn't know what I'm referring to, it is the official talk segment for Paulie Dangerously. Because yes, even going back to the late 80s, talk show segments in wrestling were all the rage. Well, at least they were in the WWF. But since Jim Herd basically wanted to be WWF Light, well, this is the kind of shit you got. And good Lord. You want to talk about low-rent, rinky-dink WWF Light segments? Look, I hate talk show segments in wrestling. I think they're so daft and so cheesy. Even the guys who are reasonably good promos during their heyday, to me, it's just... I never got the appeal of it. It just screamed sports entertainment to me, even during a time when the WWF didn't consider themselves sports entertainment. At least in a public setting. It never mattered to me what it was. Piper's Pit, the Barber Shop, King's Court, even down to the lamest of the fucking lame and whatever those Miz TV segments we used to get on Raw and SmackDown. It's been overdone to death. You know, it's like the thing people joke about with modern day podcasts. Everybody's got one. Nobody's special or unique anymore. With WWE, it's kind of the same way. And when 50% of your roster has some kind of prearranged talk show segment, what's so special about it? And it's all formulaic anyway. At least with Piper, he never knew what the hell was going to happen in his segments. But because everything is so watered down and staged anymore, like talk show segments are completely worthless. At least with Paul Lee, they were up front from the very beginning. I'm not going to waste your time talking for 15 to 20 minutes and bore you to sleep. I paid for this TV time personally. So I get 3 minutes to make my point and we're moving on. So at least they were telling you it would be quick, short, and concise. Don't change the channel. Again, though, it just looked so cheap. Paul's sitting there in front of a backdrop that basically looked like a barbershop logo. They had a black screen cap that read Danger while the words The and Zone were penciled in with fucking blue chalk. Meanwhile, you got Jack Victory standing behind him as the Secret Service agent. Why? I got no fucking clue. Kind of like how he just randomly mentioned in passing that he's now managing the Samoan SWAT team for no reason. Didn't even bother acknowledging anything about the original Midnights. Because there basically is no original Midnights anymore. Since Randy Rose ate the fall at the Chi-Town Rumble. We already know what happened with Dennis. So, Paul's very first guest on the Danger Zone talk segment. Can't necessarily call it a bad choice. It's Ric Flair. And I do have to admit, this part was pretty great. Just because we all know Paul's personality, the kiss ass that he is in real life. The entire time he's interviewing Flair here, he's just buttering the guy up from head to toe, calling him champ, saying he doesn't want to live in a world where his son has to grow up recognizing Ricky Steamboat as the world champion. He wants Flair to be the world champion. Someone that Paul's son can admire as a hero. And in reality, the reason it's really funny, if you know the history with Flair and Heyman, like the whole blow-up they had later this year once Flair started working in the office, where he basically fired Heyman for going into business for himself on television and cutting an insider promo. Just makes the whole thing so much more hilarious. Seeing these two all buddy-buddy on camera together. The main crux of the promo was Flair saying that he'll be on television next week, not only to wrestle, but to make a major announcement. So, in fact, Flair did a promo on TV to hype another promo on TV. Talk about throwing Heyman under the bus. I could make the announcement here on the debut of the Danger Zone. But now I'll just save it for next week. Also funny. Then we came back for a pre-tape promo with Ricky Steamboat. He is currently defending the World's Heavyweight Championship over in Japan. But right before he departed for overseas, he had a statement to make regarding Ric Flair. I guess Steamboat was able to telepathically predict Flair's interview ahead of time. Because he pretty much reinforced everything Flair just said in the Danger Zone segment, which I think we were intended to believe was live. But this would have clearly been taped before Ricky left for Japan. So that was a little bit of a formatting gaffe. Anyway, he talked about the different lifestyles and the values between him and Flair. But as far as commonalities, he recognizes that Flair loves the pro wrestling business in the same way Steamboat does. And he knows that Flair is gunning for his rematch and he hasn't finished with Steamboat. So anytime Flair wants to initiate that clause, be it Christmas, Thanksgiving, even his birthday, Steamboat will be ready to fight. And again, it's good if you completely discount the fact that Steamboat already knew what Flair was going to say ahead of time before Flair actually came out and said it. Minor nitpick, but I do catch things like that as a wrestling fan. We had Mike Rotunda versus Bob Emery in a TV title match. This is just so amazing. Well, first, let me just say, the match is a total nothing burger. It was fine, but it was a Mike Rotunda match. You knew what you were getting. Solid chain wrestling, but that's about it. By the way, they're also still talking about those fucking NWA Old Spice gym bags. And I still haven't been able to find evidence that they actually sold those items at one point. But the amazing part in this whole segment, Jim Ross is spending like the entire time putting over Bob Emery's work ethic, putting in the hours at the gym, training his ass off for this big moment. Apparently, he was racking up wins across the country in preparation for this match. First of all, I call bullshit on that. Bob fucking Emery was on a win streak? Who the hell is he beating? Bill Holiday? Keith Steinborn? Guarantee he wasn't racking up victories over Eddie Gilbert or Butch Reed or anybody of value. But it just made me laugh because Jim is trying so hard to give this guy credibility. And then Mike just goes in there and destroys him in like 4 minutes and wins with a sugar hold. I'm like, way to go, Bob. All that hard work to literally just go out there and get thrashed in under 5 minutes. And then we get this absolutely strange, bizarre interview with the Varsity Club. God, you want to talk about off-the-wall segments. I don't even know how to begin to describe what it was I was watching here, aside from I think they just decided, fuck it, we're going out there to wing it. This was very poorly thought out on everybody's behalf. It starts with Kevin Sullivan pulling out a contract or some kind of certified document that explains Mike Rotunda's TV title can only be on the line for the first 10 minutes of all of his matches, which, I mean, that in and of itself isn't dumb, except for the fact that wasn't this already a rule instituted by the company going back years? Pretty sure that was already written into the NWA bylaws, that the television championship could only change hands in the first 10 minutes. And if the time limit went over that, the belt couldn't change hands, even if the champion was pinned. I swear, didn't they make that a whole story with Tully Blanchard and Dusty Rhodes? Or did I just dream that? So, I mean, that was already kind of head-scratching. And then things just completely went out of whack with Dr. Death having what appeared to be some kind of mental breakdown or heat stroke. He just starts getting all angry and pissed off for no reason. Started rolling on the floor and doing crunches and ripping off his varsity jacket. Oh, and then Dan Spivey decided to talk, because that went over so well the other week. He just randomly blurts out that Rotunda should put up 10 grand for all of his matches just to give his challengers incentive. And, well, instead of Rotunda punching this lame brain in the face as hard as humanly possible for even suggesting such an asinine idea, Mike's just like, you know, that's a good thought. I'll do it. You fucking moron. This whole thing just, I don't even know what the thought process was. It was like everybody collectively decided, we need to get our shit in. That's what it turned into. A nonsensical, rambling promo where everybody's acting out and trying to get their own stuff over. Which, I mean, let's be honest, that was kind of the design for the studio shows back in the day. Everybody had minimal amount of screen time every week to get themselves over, so that kind of was the goal. But this was just out of control. Then from there we had the Midnights going up against Joe Kazana and Julio Barrera. I don't know where they found this Julio Barrera guy from, but God, was he terrible. At first I was trying to figure out who he resembled facially. Kind of looked like Barry Darso if he spent 3 months eating nothing but cake and artificially processed foods. I can't say he was the worst jobber I've ever seen. I mean, he was only in there for probably 2 minutes. It was not a good 2 minutes. Take it from me, one of the biggest Midnight Express marks you'll ever find. When beautiful Bobby is struggling to figure out what to do with you in the ring, that is bad. He did give Barrera a body slam at one point, which looked very impressive. Really just an extended squash where they had fun beating up the two worthless scrubs. They went over with the rocket launcher. Kind of looked like Bobby forgot momentarily that he was the legal guy at the end. Because you see him hit the splash, and then he runs over to the corner and pauses, and then turns around and gets the cover. I was like, that was weird. Did Bobby forget that Stan just tagged him? Not used to seeing Bobby mess anything up, so when he does, you're almost caught off guard by it. Then we had a pretty big jump cut in the taping block this week. At first I kind of figured, well, we are coming up on Barry Windham leaving for the WWF. Maybe they couldn't show the film because he already left. But then he was out wrestling a few segments later, so clearly that wasn't the reason. They were supposed to air highlights of the Luger-Windham U.S. title match from the Chi-Town pay-per-view, but right as they went to pitch to the video feed, there's a huge cut to Luger walking out to the podium with a strap. They just cut out the whole match entirely. I don't know what the reason for that was. Was that a WWE Network thing, or was that a Turner Network thing? In any case, Luger showed up in a relatively good mood. And you could tell he was in a good mood because he showed up without a shirt on. So we got to see Pexy Lexi this week, showing off all the goods. He kept referring to Magnum TA as Maggie, which I don't think Terry was very enthused about. If he wasn't so professional, I'd have expected him to be like, how about we just go with Magnum? Anyway, Luger talked about this, that, and the other thing, promising not to be a closeted champion, which had some connotations that could be read a different way. He said that he'd be a long reigning champion, which is very accurate. Basically vowed to represent the people and make sure to take on all comers. And if Barry wants to be at the front of the line, then more power to him. I obviously covered this when we reviewed the Chi-Town pay-per-view. Luger desperately needed this win. Regardless of whether or not Barry was about to leave the NWA, I still think they would have needed to pull the trigger on the title switch. I mean, the track record for Luger post-Starrcade has been very spotty. He's kind of been thrust into the background. Didn't really have a whole lot of steam coming out of the loss to Flair. Putting the U.S. title on him was absolutely the right call at the right time. And like I said, he's about to have a very lengthy run with the belt. Granted, they're also about to turn him heel in the not-so-distant future. But I think at least in the interim, this helped to give fans a little bit of a renewed opinion on Luger after failing to beat Flair for the world title last year. Twice. And that took us to the Samoan SWAT teams match with Bobby Mercedes and Joe Cruz. Was this just like the week of the Latino job, guys? Did they go down to the border and scoop up as many dudes as they could find? I was going to make another joke about it, but I'll err on the side of caution. Now, obviously, we know who the Samoan SWAT team are. Samu and Fatu. They wrestled in the WWF as the Head Shrinkers. And we covered a lot of their stuff on the Raw reviews going back to 93 and 94. There was also that very brief window where they replaced Samu with the Barbarian, and that was always just kind of glossed over. And again, it's just one of those deals where you watch the on-screen product and things are just randomly happening from week to week with very little explanation. They mentioned that Paul is now affiliated with the Samoan SWAT team, just totally dropping the original Midnights thing, moving along like none of it ever happened. Basically, it was, we want to keep Paul as an active on-screen talent, but since we don't have Dennis or Randy around anymore, gotta find another team for him to manage. So enter Samu and Fatu. To be fair, they did briefly talk about Randy and Dennis during this match. Paul said that he gave Dennis a payout to retire in Colorado, and he did the same for Randy Rose, even if he has to take a little more money out of the bank in the short term to feed his family. He said that Randy deserves to retire happily at the age of, can't believe I'm about to say this, 31. And I'm like, that has to be a rib, right? There's no way Randy Rose was actually 31 years old in 1989. So I did a little research. Turns out Paul was incorrect. Randy Rose was actually 33 years old in 1989. Dude, if you looked at me with a straight face and told me that Randy Rose was in his mid-40s, I would not have batted an eyelash. I would have fully agreed. He was 33. The hell was in the water back in the day with these people? Everybody back in the 1970s and the 1980s, if they were in their 30s, everyone looked like they were in their 70s. Now it's like the polar opposite effect. Now people that are in their 30s look like they're 12. Hormones. Science. Some weird shit, man. Now, yes, Paul does in real life actually have a very good relationship with the Onawa family. So you can look back and see how a lot of this ties together. They were actually coming off a fairly big run in Dallas from what I remember, right? I think they became the Samoan SWAT team when they were still working in Puerto Rico. They obviously had huge success there. But getting that American television exposure on a semi-big stage, working for Fritz, getting to wrestle the top names like the Von Erichs, that was a pretty big milestone for those two. And you think about it, they were only really in the business at that point for what? A year? And you can even see it here in their match. They were obviously very green. Goes without saying. 2 or 3 years in the business. They weren't exactly going to be working like Terry and Dory Funk Jr. out there. God, every time I go back and see old footage of Fatu, I'm reminded of just how much Solo Sikoa facially resembles him. If Solo grew out his hair and dyed everything dark brown, he would look exactly like his dad. So, yeah, overall, not the cleanest match in the world, but I thought the Samoans looked all right in their debut. Paulie did a good job putting him over on commentary and trying to establish them as the next big threat in the tag division. Clearly setting up the program with them in the Midnight Express. And, you remember how I was telling you to enjoy seeing Bobby and Stan actually win a feud? That was about to drastically change over the next 12 months. Bobby and Stan were going to be doing plenty of jobs, thanks to the new administration. Then we came back for a not-so-great Barry Windham promo. Also, Kendall and Matsuda were there in the background, which is pretty much all they were useful for. So we talked about his hand injury from the pay-per-view, said it was no excuse for him losing the U.S. title. Now, the problem lies with the fact that Barry's shoulders were clearly off the mat well before Luger's. Now, Luger's going around pretending to be the U.S. champion when everybody knows the truth. Truth is, Barry should still be recognized as the rightful U.S. heavyweight champ. And nothing's going to stop him from getting his belt back. Except the WWF contract. And when I say the promo wasn't great, the material was okay. It was just, Barry wasn't the best at delivering promos. Just calling it like it is. But he had a short squash with George South. It kind of is what it is, man. Guys got one foot out the door with the promotion. I don't know how much notice he would have given WCW. I mean, I just kind of presume that once his contract ran out, he basically had his mind made up. Maybe that wasn't the case, though. Maybe they figured he'd re-sign, but they tried to offer him less money, and then he said, well, fuck you, I'll just go work for Vince. Yeah, I don't know how that whole contract negotiation went down, but considering the treatment of a lot of those old Crockett names, it really wouldn't surprise me if they didn't see any value in Barry Windham at the time. Not saying I agree with them. I think Barry was a wonderful talent. But I also knew the mindset of a lot of people working in the office around this time. So nothing surprises me. Again, it's a decent squash. Barry still had the hand taped up, so he couldn't perform his signature claw hold. Did a good job selling throughout the match, even though the whole premise is, I'm not hurt, my hand is perfectly fine. And we all plainly see that's bullshit. It's just, again, knowing that Barry isn't around for much longer, I'm still curious as to why they had him go over in squash matches, and the fact that they were still working this hand injury story at the time is weird. I would have figured the Chi-Town Rumble would have been his send-off. Like an injury angle to write the guy off TV. Kind of books itself. We had Sting versus the Raider. It's funny, anytime I see a random-ass job guy on this show, my hindbrain immediately tells me, so they got Jack Victory working another bad gimmick, huh? Pretty sure this wasn't Victory. He looked too fat and short. Sting toyed around with him for a few minutes, tried going after the mask. At one point, JR tried to ask the Raider where he was from. He just goes, oh, parts unknown. Well, that's just right down the road from Who's He What's He. I love when JR doesn't give a fuck. The dry humor kills me. Stinger Splash, Scorpion, Victory. Not Jack Victory, just Victory. We had a Midnight Express promo. Pretty good one at that. I'd argue Jim Cornette did the best job at rationalizing the original Midnight story better than anybody else on this show. He basically said they ran them out of the company and predicted they'd never be seen again. Meanwhile, Paul's bringing in a couple tree-humping coconut head goons from the South Pacific to fight his battles now. It was almost a direct quote. He I basically said that nothing would stop the Midnights from getting their hands on Paul. All I remember is there's a point in this promo where Stan walks around to pull Bobby Eaton into the shot because he was standing on the opposite side of the podium at the time. You see Stan whisper something into Bobby's ear, and they both start laughing. I don't know what he said, but I did take note of him pointing to somebody off camera. I wouldn't be shocked if it was something like, "See that girl in the front row, Bobby? We're doing it tonight." And then Bobby's just like, "Dude, fuck yeah." Again, I have no proof that was the case, but based on Stan's history, it's good speculation. And we had... I'm sorry. I just read the name here and I popped myself. Dr. Death and Dan Spivey versus Steve Casey and Crash Chandler. I can't even... I can't even say it without laughing. That is the single best job guy name I've ever heard. It also led to the best moment on the entire show this week where JR is just openly mocking the name. The minute he tags in, and you hear JR emphasizing the name Crash Chandler. Let's see what Crash Chandler does in this match. Dr. Death grabs the guy, shoots him off into the corner as hard as humanly possible. Chandler hits sternum first, falls right on the mat like a sack of shit. Magnum TA just goes, "Well, he crashed." Fucking died. I knew it was coming, but I still wasn't mentally prepared for the burial. By the way, did I mention Dan Spivey was in this match? Yeah, I don't think I need to tell you again how much he sucked. We covered that in his debut the other week. But man, watching him team with a guy that was leaps and bounds a better worker than Dan Spivey ever was. Not to say Steve Williams was the greatest worker of all time, but compared to Spivey out there, good Lord. He was fucking Ric Flair. It just baffles me because they're both in there working over this Chandler geek. And like the whole deal is him and Dr. Death are tagging back and forth and working over the guy's back. But you watch the way Spivey works in comparison to Dr. Death. Spivey doesn't look like he could break an egg. Meanwhile, Dr. Death is in there just slaughtering the guy. The finish made me furious too. Spivey puts the guy in a bear hug, and he's just cranking on this hold for a minute or two. And I'm like, okay, is the guy going to submit? No sooner should I say that, Spivey just lets go of the hold. And then, instead of tagging Dr. Death back in, he goes to shoot the guy off, and he catches him in another fucking bear hug. Only this time, it was the actual finish. So what was the point of breaking the bear hug the first time? Absolutely nothing. He just fucking sucked. There's no other way to put it, folks. He was a very, very bad pro wrestler. Still arguably not as bad as Ahmed Johnson. But we are splitting hairs in that kind of conversation. Speaking of bad things, this Sting promo, this is also no good. Not even because of the delivery. He literally had nothing to say. He basically said, I want somebody to challenge me because I'm bored. And what have I been saying about the booking of Sting lately? The fact that he's just a dude on this show with no definitive direction? Well, here he is basically saying the quiet part out loud. I want competition. Give me somebody to feud with. Translation, hey, George Scott, Jim Hurd, somebody with the pen. Give me a fucking feud. My stock is rapidly dropping off. And yes, I am well aware of what this is all setting up. We talked about Muda. But like, this is what he was sent out to do. A 30-second promo saying, you want somebody to challenge you. And that was exactly what the Stinger did. No flavor, no substance, just a very plain Jane babyface promo. Butch Reed versus Gator Gilmore. Boring. Reed won with a flying shoulder block. Only notable thing about it was him calling someone in the crowd a bimbo. And then JR responded with, well, that's not very nice. And then we closed with a tag match with Hayes and JYD versus Trent Knight and Gary Royal. I liked how Magnum and JR just totally spilled the beans about the reality of the Hayes JYD tag team, outright saying, we have no idea why these two are partners. We really don't know what their endgame is together. But hey, they're great workers. That is all that matters. I wouldn't necessarily call Hayes and Dog great in-ring workers, but I kind of see what they were getting at. It is true, though. They literally are a tag team for no reason. They showed up one week together, and that was the extent of the explanation. I think they were just trying to avoid letting the dog work for extensive periods of time by himself. Admittedly, I kind of zoned out watching this. The stuff I did pay attention to, a lot of it just looked very plodding and slow. Of course, that was only when the dog was in there. Hayes won with the DDT. That's all I cared to write down. And then they closed with a promo basically promoting their return to the Midsouth area the following night. I guess they were going to be in Shreveport or Baton Rouge, one of the two. I mean, they barely had 10 seconds to say anything. Show was a lot better this week, though. Especially hour 2. And the last 20 minutes of the show was mainly boring. I think I really covered a lot of the main talking points at the beginning, though. Between now and the Wrestle War pay-per-view in May, there's going to be a whole lot of downtime, and I hate to use the term filler, but it's what a lot of these studio shows are rapidly shaping up to be. And we've talked about the de-emphasis on making the TBS shows come off as special. It's just becoming more and more apparent by the week. I mean, the next Clash event they're about to run is one of the more disastrous shows they run all year, because not only did they try to run it head-to-head against WrestleMania, they didn't even advertise the fucking thing on television. And so that Steamboat Flair rematch, good Christ. You could tell I've been talking too long. I like that, though. Flare boat. That's what we'll call that feud. But, I mean, it does a terrible rating. An awful rating. And, like, everybody in the office is like, well, what happened? It's because you didn't promote it. You numbskulls. It's the reality of the situation we're in, though, brother. Call it what you want. Incompetence, laziness, intentional sabotage. Bottom line is things are about to get a whole hell of a lot worse before they get any better. So we've had a lot of big things happening in Midsouth over the last several weeks. Actually, even dating back longer than that. But just to catch everybody up to speed on what's been going on, Bill Watts was back this week to do some house cleaning and try to tie up some loose ends from a few items that they, I don't want to say put on the back burner, but story angles that they haven't really touched on all that recently. The main one being the status of Hacksaw Jim Duggan. If you remember, I think this is going back at least 3, maybe 4 weeks at this point. Duggan was part of that coal miner's glove match that took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And this is right before they had started the TV title tournament, which Duggan was supposed to originally be a part of. So, if my math is correct, yeah, we are dating back 4 weeks. And it was during that match where he had been attacked by the Russians and put out of commission. According to Watts, they've been trying to locate Duggan to get an idea of when he's coming back. The problem is nobody's seen or heard from Duggan in weeks. He's basically on AWOL. So they're trying to figure out what's going on there to determine why Duggan hasn't been responding to messages. Meanwhile, we're continuing along in the TV title tournament. We are now in week 5. I believe it was the final round of the first round series of tournament matches. So next week we will have officially entered the second round. But that was a big part of this week's program as well. Talk about all that. And then there's the Magnum TA Wrestling 2 stuff, which really boiled over on last week's show during that contract signing. And because there's a lot of detail, I'm not going to go bullet by bullet point on everything we saw. But this week we had Magnum and Jim Ross in a scheduled interview to get some feedback on where things are at a week after the big blow-up. And Jim did a great job laying out the timeline. The Midsouth Board of Directors declared Magnum as the #1 contender to the North American title. Mr. Wrestling 2 took issue with that, and he's been very outspoken about it on television. Last week we saw Magnum try to stand up to his mentor and basically tell Wrestling 2 that he's acting like a pompous asswipe, without directly using that terminology. Although he did say that 2 was making an ass out of himself. So now that the contract has been ripped up, Magnum asked for this time to address the fans and let everybody know where he stands. And again, we're kind of back to humble and modest Magnum here. Sort of a step back from what we saw a week ago when Magnum showed a little bit of fire by looking his coach in the face and telling him that he was being a dirtbag. But Magnum basically gets the point across that he's grateful for everything 2's done to advance his career. He's grateful that 2 saw something in Magnum and wanted to make him an all-time great. But at the same time, Magnum also recognizes that while he's still young and in the prime of his career, Wrestling 2's sort of in the twilight of his career. He's battling Father Time. And if that title shot means so much to Wrestling 2, then Magnum will gladly step aside and let his coach take his spot. And boy, howdy, let me tell you, that was not what Wrestling 2 wanted to hear. Big mistake on Magnum's part. Again, the youthfulness of TA coming back to bite him in the ass. Here comes Wrestling 2, immediately on the defensive, telling Magnum that he doesn't hand over anything to Wrestling 2. In fact, just to prove that 2 deserves that North American title shot against JYD, he's going to wrestle Magnum right here, right now to prove his point. And again, you see things getting really hostile between these two. It has basically gone to a point, and we're going to hear this from Bill Watts when he comes over in just a sec, so I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag here. But you see that the issue has really developed into a personal jealousy. You can't even really call it a professional level jealousy where, Wrestling 2 sees how great Magnum has become, and now 2 wants to show that he's still got enough fuel left in the tank. He's just a bitter, resentful scumbag. I mean, that's really what it is. He has a personal resentment against Magnum. And Magnum makes it clear up front, Coach, I'm not going to wrestle you. And even after getting slapped in the face a couple times here, Magnum still won't do it. So 2's calling Magnum a coward and just continuing to twist that knife even further into their relationship. And finally, Bill Watts says, enough of this garbage. He has his moment of intellect. He's not going to sit back and let this perpetual bullying and hazing continue, because it's not even in good faith anymore. So he interjects and tells Wrestling 2 that he's so blinded by jealousy and rage, he can't even look at the bigger picture in all this. He should be proud of Magnum. He should be happy to see him getting this title shot. It's a chance for him to give back to Wrestling 2 for all that training and coaching he's done for Magnum, to help advance his career forward. But again, man, bitter, resentful Wrestling 2 ain't hearing it. And in fact, he is so confident in his abilities, he doesn't even need Magnum to be a tag team partner. He can get any ham and egger to be his partner in order to challenge and take down the Midnight Express. Magnum's nothing special. He's just a cog in the wheel. God, that is really harsh shit, dude. It's just brutal. I mean, it's great stuff, don't get me wrong, but holy cow. It's like I said earlier, the story of this dissension between Magnum and 2, it really boils down to the simple fact that 2 knows he's on borrowed time. He sees this young, hot prodigy that's looking to become the next big name in the business. 2 just can't handle the fact that Magnum's become so successful in such a short span of time. I think you could even view it as a situation where he's not even mad at Magnum. He's mad at himself. Now he's taking his outrage out on Magnum as a result. You see, that's multi-layered great storytelling that you can actually follow. I mean, there's layers to it, of course, but it's not this overtly convoluted puzzle that you have to piece together with terrible vague clues, or you have to be some insider to connect all the dots. No, this is all plain as view, man. They're telling you this story on television. I mean, it's got some philosophical undertones if you really want to read into it, but there's no guesswork here. They're not leaving you all these, what's the term they use in the video game industry? These Easter eggs going back like 6-7 months, and like only 0.1% of the audience actually follows what's going on. No, this is just plain as day. Love it. Absolutely love it. And hats off to Bill Watts for coming to the aid of Magnum and standing up for him here. That's what a good boss does. So, coming back for our first match of the week, we have the Midnight Express taking on, well, what was supposed to be Joe Savoldi and John King. I'll get back to that in a sec. During Cornette's pre-match tirade, he definitely foreshadowed one of the biggest moments that we're about to capture on Midsouth television in a short while. Still poking the bear, still calling out Bill Watts and saying he's sick of hearing him disrespect people and tear down the people that Cornette admires, aka all the heels. And if he had anything to say about it, if someone actually had the balls to walk up to Jim's face and disrespect him, he'd slap that punk-ass jabroni silly. Those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, brother. That's all I'm going to say about that. So again, it was supposed to be the Midnights taking on Savoldi and King. But right before they rang the bell, Wrestling 2 came down and pulled Savoldi out to the side, basically telling him to hit the brakes because he's going to wrestle in this match. Obviously playing into the story they established in the previous segment where 2 said he could team with anybody on the roster and still defeat the Midnights. He doesn't need Magnum as a partner to get the job done. I guess we're meant to believe that in the process of Wrestling 2 buying out Savoldi's contract to wrestle in this match, that also implied that Savoldi had no knowledge of this happening. And or he didn't give a fuck and he just said, well, I'm not going to argue with this grumpy old loon bat. He might beat the shit out of me. I don't blame him. If I were Joe Savoldi in that situation, I would have put my hands up and said, all right, dude, he's all yours. And this went pretty much as expected. Wrestling 2 starts out the match and single-handedly outworks Bobby and Dennis for a couple minutes. And then he tags in John King, at which point the match immediately turns in favor of the heels. I did nearly scream at the end when Bobby was going to pick up King in the vertical suplex position so he could pass him off to Dennis on the middle rope. God, Bobby came within like a hair's reach of dropping this guy. Like straight down on his head. I was like, oh God. He's about to kill him. But he muscled him up to Dennis. They struggled for a sec to get King in position for the power slam. And then Dennis eventually just kind of fell forward with King in his arms and said, good enough for me. And from there, that's where pandemonium ensued. We had the heels ganging up on Wrestling 2 after the match. And after they're stomping a mud hole in him for a few seconds, Magnum TA eventually tries to run out to make the save. Now, at the same time, he was also scheduled to wrestle Crusher Darso next. So Darso picked his spot and came in to blindside Magnum and run him into the ring post on the floor. Meanwhile, the Midnights kept beating on Wrestling 2 before driving a tennis racket into his throat. And this is actually really well done with how they shot this because, you know, when Magnum tried to run out to help, Wrestling 2 was already down selling. So he wasn't even aware that Magnum was in the ring. By the time he got back on his feet, Magnum had already been laid out on the floor. So from his vantage point, Wrestling 2's, you know, he probably just assumed that Magnum never attempted to come out to help. Now, is that going to be a story detail they address on television? We'll have to see. I don't ever recall that specific detail being factored into this feud, but it would tie in with those two already not being on the same page. They already kind of did something similar to this a while back, but I don't think they ever addressed it again. So we'll see if anything changes. But of course, the bigger issue at hand, because Magnum was scheduled to face Darso, and it is a TV title round, mind you. I don't think I said that. There's some big implications here. And if Magnum can't compete, injury or not, he'll have to forfeit the round of Darso, which means Darso is going to advance to the next round. Oh, I'll get back to that in a sec, but I have to address this pre-tape with the Russians and Paul Bosch from Houston. So, you all know the story with Crusher Darso turning heel and aligning with Nikolai Volkov, selling out for Russian morals and all that hot garbage. Darso has now graduated to a new status. Because Volkov likes him, and he sees that Darso's been loyal to Russia, he is now legally changing his name to Crusher Khrushchev. Or as Volkov actually said in this promo, Crusher. So yes, he is now Crusher Khrushchev and or Crusher, depending on whose opinion you ask. The whole thing is so fucking ridiculous on its face. The fact that you can just legally change somebody's name because they adopt new cultural values without having to go through all the legal procedures and paperwork. Nope. Apparently you can just say, I am now changing this man's name to Crusher Khrushchev. Legally. Well, hey, glad to know it's that simple. If I ever decide to sell out to adopt Russian values, I'll send Vladimir Putin a personal email asking if I can now be referred to as Tommy Khrushchev. And I'm sure he'll get right back to me just as soon as he's done dealing with other things on his plate. All right, I'm not going to go there. I know it's too topical. By the way, I love how the gift that Volkov bestowed upon Darso for this honorable occasion, a red shovel. Stupendous. I'm also convinced that every time Volkov sings the Russian national anthem, the lyrics somehow either get inverted or he's just making up shit on the fly. I have to go back and check my sources, but pretty sure he's just making up words. It's made even funnier when, after Volkov finishes singing, Darso just goes, that was beautiful. Fucking Volkov. So proud of himself. He just goes, yeah, that was beautiful. I laughed so hard. This whole segment was just remarkably 1980s. The evil foreigners making asses of themselves publicly. It never gets old. And of course, that led right into the follow-up tournament round between now Crusher Khrushchev and Magnum TA. And it's another extraordinarily well-done segment. This whole thing was so well laid out. You got Magnum hitting the ring with a bandage over his head. He's got the dry blood splotches all over his face and chest from getting run into the ring post earlier. But they're trying to sell the story that he's got the heart and fire and passion to come out here, whether he's 100%, 50%, 10%. Magnum's going to fight with every last breath he has. And they're having a great back and forth slugger. Magnum is literally fighting for his life to stay alive here. And about 3/4 of the way through the match, here comes Wrestling 2 down to ringside with a towel. At which point you knew immediately where this was going. You're like, oh shit. He's going to screw over Magnum. Sure enough, this disreputable dirtbag bitter old man, he has the ref distracted as Crusher's holding Magnum in the over-the-shoulder backbreaker. And I will concede, I'm not going to say this was a perfect segment in terms of how it was formatted or laid out. Like, the whole thing where the ref was turning away from Magnum and Crusher for what basically amounted to a full minute, arguing with Wrestling 2 on the floor, that looked a little weird. I get the whole idea is Magnum fights out of the backbreaker. He manages to use the turnbuckle to kick his feet back and then fall on top of Khrushchev to pin him. And then right as Magnum had the pinfall, Wrestling 2 deliberately throws in the towel to fuck him over. I get all that. The problem was, the ref turning his back to argue with 2 went on for so long. It got to a point where I was like, can you just turn around for 5 seconds? It's not even like Wrestling 2 was trying to hit the ring or slide in a gimmick. He was just bickering with the official. But it went on for so long, it just ended up getting really awkward. Because you're just waiting for Magnum to reverse the hold and get the pin. A lot of wasted time. But again, they got the story across that they needed to. And, oddly enough, Magnum did not seem all too upset about it. He looked more dejected than anything. I mean, granted, he never saw 2 throw in the towel. But we all saw what happened. I mean, you can't even suspend disbelief that this was accidental. That was 1,000% deliberate. Even after break, as Watts is trying to explain everything that we, the viewers, just saw at home watching, Wrestling 2 is still trying to defend his actions here, saying he did what he needed to do because Magnum was bleeding and totally helpless. And if the people can't see that, then maybe they're the problem. So, well, he storms off. And then Watts kind of dovetails into Butch Reed and Jim Neidhart's feud. They recently competed in a football helmet match in Houston. To which people immediately ask, what is a football helmet match? Well, it's pretty much what you would figure it would be if you knew anything about wacky gimmicks in wrestling. You take some type of object and you stick it on a pole. Gee-oh, man. If only we knew somebody who had an obsession with pole gimmicks throughout wrestling history. After we literally just saw a coal miner's glove match where the objective was to grab a coal miner's glove suspended on a 10-foot pole, now they're literally doing the same thing with a football helmet. Now, it does play into the story between Reed and Neidhart, where Reed had illegally used a helmet to take out an opponent, and both of these guys do have football backgrounds. Watts said it was the blow-off to their rivalry. So we go to the footage where we see Reed grabbing the helmet off the pole, but then he gets press-slammed off the top so Neidhart can put the helmet on. And right as he's about to charge Reed, thinking 3 steps ahead of the game, Reed reaches into his tights and throws powder in Neidhart's eyes. And that way Reed can regain possession of the helmet. So he gives Neidhart a series of headbutts. You see the anvil come up bleeding from the forehead after he's basically fighting on instinct at this point. And, pretty sure Reed won the match, but For whatever reason, I didn't write it down here. All I know is Terry Taylor tried to run out during the post-match assault to try to stop Reed, but then he ended up getting his ass kicked. He bloodied him up and left him a mangled mess. I did mention last week that I'm pretty sure Neidhart is about to leave the territory soon. This definitely looked like a way to write him off. Finishing off the feud with him and Butch. Him doing a job on the way out the door. And obviously, introducing Taylor into the equation. Well, that's going to open up the door for those two to start feuding. It was a fine segment. I mean, the anything on a pole stipulation matches are going to get immediately lambasted by today's generation of fans. Probably because of the reputation of Russo. I never had a problem with pole matches, so long as the gimmicks weren't asinine and there was a real reason to do one. But those kind of stipulation matches have kind of been phased out in recent times. Does anybody remember the last pole match that happened in wrestling? Been a long time. I'd be fine with them bringing back the pole stipulation again. So long as the gimmick isn't Viagra or fucking Judy Bagwell. Then we had Butch Reed and Buddy Landel versus Mike Jackson and Jason Walker. Quick, fun little match. I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the Buddy Landel Butch Reed team is by far one of the most underrated tag teams of all time. Those two are phenomenal together in Midsouth. The perfect two personalities to have as a pair. And I think I've talked about this too, but this is probably the best period to go back and look at Buddy's career if you're curious about him. I know he's kind of had a shaky reputation amongst a lot of people, but 1984 was his peak. He was in great shape, heavily motivated. I mean, he still had his flaws and demons around this time. Nobody's perfect. But in terms of consistency and professionalism, I would say this is probably Buddy's best year in the business. He ended up pinning Walker with a corkscrew elbow. Terry Taylor and Jerry Gray was another brief little standby that I didn't write much down about. I think Taylor's scheduled to wrestle Masayo Ito in the tournament next week. So this is kind of just a way to get Taylor on the show in preparation for that match. They also replayed the angle from last week where he and the Rock and Roll Express painted Darso red. And I can confirm, last week I think I said it looked more pinkish than it did red. Pretty sure that was just a lighting thing though, because when they showed the footage this week, you know, the paint was most definitely red. And of course, that's all based on the idea that if Darso wants to turn on his country and adopt the red colors, well, he can wear those colors loud and proud up and down his body. Just a little humiliation tactic to send a message. It did kind of register to me after this segment. Terry Taylor's got a lot of stuff going on right now. He's got a huge match with Masayo Ito in the TV title tournament. Like at the same time, he's still beefing with the Russians. Now he's going to get involved with Hacksaw Butch Reed. It's a lot of big, nasty evil to have breathing down your neck. Now, if I were Taylor, I'd have the Ricky and Robert on speed dial, just in case. Speaking of those handsome little devils, the Rock and Roll were in action this week against Randy Barber and Steve Brinson. I can't believe that I even have to write something like this down. But with today's modern wrestling, I mean, it is nice to give people a reminder on how things used to be, back when the boys actually did things the correct way. When you watch this match, You see Ricky and Robert working over Barber's leg. You know what they're still both doing in the process? Is they're double teaming him and keeping the pressure on him. They're tagging. And not any of this backslap tag bullshit we see today, or things that constitute tags that aren't really tags to begin with, but the referees just let them get away with it. No, Ricky and Robert were both taking turns working over Barber. Quick little rapid fire exchanges. But they were still tagging and following the rules and not burying the ref. They don't just freely enter the ring and start doing combo shit in front of the ref willy-nilly. God, it's like amazing that I even have to bring something like that up in 2025. But tag team wrestling is such a lost art anymore. I mean, I'll even go as far as to say, I don't even really think tag team wrestling exists in today's era. I can write a thesis paper about it. Real tag team wrestling's been dead for a very long time, folks. And you're not going to change my mind about it. Watch any fucking tag match in AEW. Tell me that is real tag team wrestling. Out of here with that shit. If you think watching a Bucks match is real tag team wrestling, you're a moron. So Ricky and Robert went over with a double drop kick. I don't think Brinson tagged in one time during this match. He just stood on the apron like a dork and watched Barber get massacred. Wrestling 2 should try teaming with him next week. And hey, on the topic of teams, we've had a lot of newbies showing up to the Mid-South area as of late, including a good handful of teams. And we've got another one coming to the Mid-South area very soon. They are known as the Bruise Brothers. Obviously a play on words. I mean, they were dressed exactly like the original Blues Brothers here. Black suits, top hats, sunglasses. What's the phrase I like to use? Cold dudes with smooth moves. Now, I had first seen footage of the Bruise Brothers when they were still in Memphis as members of the First Family with Jimmy Hart. We actually got a cool little cameo from Jimmy here in this promo package. And, well, let me backtrack for a sec because I said they're coming to the Mid-South area. I'm not entirely sure how the story goes. I know Jim Cornette's recalled it several times on his podcast because they were originally setting up something between them and the Midnight Express. I mean, if you don't know Pork Chop Cash and Troy Graham, they were a very formidable tag team that Jerry Jarrett pushed in Memphis, and I think it was 1982 when they first started working together. Graham had already been there as the Dream Machine for a little bit, but I think Cash had just come into the territory. It's one of those really weird things where I remember even when I went back and watched the 1984 tape library of Mid-South several years ago, I remember they showed this promotional video a couple of times. Like the whole street video where Cash and Graham are walking around with a briefcase through these back alleys and collecting money from people, showing up at poll halls and shit like that. But I don't specifically remember them doing a whole lot in Mid-South. And I think the reason for that is because Graham ends up getting hurt very early on. And I think they ended up replacing him with Mad Dog Boyd. I don't recall the specifics of how that injury happened or what exactly it was, but I do believe it ended up signaling the end of the Dream Machine's in-ring career. Kind of an unfortunate event that just didn't pan out as they expected. And I think that's how they end up shifting gears and jumping right into the Midnight Rock and Roll feud after the Midnights win the tag belts. So it is one of those what-if scenarios. What was the original plan with bringing in the Bruise Brothers? I mean, they were definitely going to get used as a top tag team, no doubt. All you can kind of do is speculate. But there you have it. Another tremendous episode of Mid-South Television. I mean, outside the standbys, this was an episode where I can make a rational case that damn near every single solitary segment was picture perfect. Everything had a purpose. It had meaning. I mean, granted, that's usually the goal of your wrestling show is to make everything matter. But I say it every week. I genuinely look forward to going back and watching the next episode of Mid-South Television, knowing how well everything flows from week to week. And because this is the period where things really start heating up and ramping up with the company, business starts to take off again. And you can really hear the crowd energy of the Irish McNeil Boys Club. Fans are on their feet. They're reacting to shit. You see just how invested they are in everybody. And that really helps to make the show special. Everybody's over. Everybody's a star. Everybody has value in the eyes of the fans. And you can feed off that crowd response. You see the general excitement in the room. It's not just people sitting on their hands and popping for moves. Because that's basically what today's wrestling culture is. People pop for spots. They pop for moments. It's all about reaction. We're in the reaction business now. I mean, yeah, you still have stars. You still have people that are over. But are fans genuinely excited about the matches from bell to bell? Are they actually invested in what's going on? It's kind of 50-50. But it translates as a viewer watching at home. It's why it's really difficult for me to watch AEW clips. You know, the rare times that I actually do. Because I hear the dead crowds a lot of the time. And it's like, how am I supposed to get invested in this? The impression that I'm being given watching is somebody that's not currently following the product. The people that are buying tickets to watch these shows live, they don't care what's going on. They're not reacting to anything. So why should I care? You know what I mean? That stuff matters. It really does. But there's so much great stuff happening right now, and it's only going to pick up from here. And I guess with that little tangent out of the way, we can talk about World Class for the week. I don't entirely want to talk about this particular episode because, well, they were doing pretty well there for a while. Shows were getting better. The stories were getting a little more engaging, especially compared to a lot of the stuff we were seeing in 85. I mean, they had some fun segments just within the last several weeks. And that's amid the heartbreaking news about the loss of Gino Hernandez. I don't know, this one just seemed like a sizable step back compared to what we were getting lately. I guess a lot of that had to do with the TV main event. Me being kind of numb to the idea of Von Erich Freebird matches after seeing it for the better part of the last 3 years. On and off, yes, but well, I'll talk about it. Overall, that was just my main takeaway for the week. Really not much of anything going on. They opened with Jerry Allen versus Mark Youngblood. A lot of this match was hindered by the bad technical glitches. And that was all original taping issues. That wasn't even a network thing. It was still watchable, but I mean, anybody that's watched VHS, remember, like, you'd get those occasional moments where the tape would start to go bad, then everything would get shaky. There was a lot of static in the upper and lower portions of the screen. It's kind of what was going on here. But that was only part of the issue. The other issue is that it was just a terribly boring match with two guys that the people didn't give a shit about. Plus, the finish was fucking rotten. It was weird because I'm pretty sure they were supposed to be babyfaces. I mean, Youngblood was working more like the heel in certain spots, but it was a pretty clean match for the most part. And they just did basic chain stuff for a while until the end where they started trading small package pins. And this whole thing got so fucked up. I don't even think David Manning really knew what was going on here. It looked like they had both pinned each other's shoulders down. But then after they both got back up and started doing a collar and elbow lockup in the corner, Manning called for the bell and awarded the match to Youngblood. I mean, the people were so confused by it, they didn't even react. Some of them mildly went, boo. The rest of them just sat on their hands and looked stone-faced. I mean, it's a cold prelim, so it's not like there was any story to it. But, yeah, this just didn't work. Crowd didn't care. Neither of these two looked to have a ton of chemistry. I think it would have worked better if there was an identifiable good guy and bad guy. But they tried to work it like a babyface match and just didn't get over. And then we had a quick little package deal showing Kevin Von Erich meeting with a group of local kids in the Dallas region. I couldn't make out what Bill Mercer said, but it was one of those nonprofit organizations for younger kids. The video itself was cute, but the overly fanfare-like heroic music was a little bit on the nose. That had to have been canned. But this is a specialty of the Von Erichs from back in the day. Them being so close to the community and doing these local outreach programs for the Dallas area. It's always nice when you go back and see a time when charity work was actually valued in the industry. Occasionally you see WWE putting together video packages for this kind of stuff, but I don't know. The way they've always presented those videos just comes across so sleazy. Like, it always came off as more of a publicity stunt than it did the company trying to actually work with these nonprofits for the greater good. Susan G. Komen, Connor's Cure. It's a what can we benefit from you type deal. Just my personal take. Then we had Rick Rude versus The Missing Link. Non-title. Although it was the first time they recognized Rude on television as the World Heavyweight Champion. That was one of the bigger news bulletins coming out of last week. Them renaming the American Heavyweight Championship the World Heavyweight Championship. And remember, Fritz had withdrawn from the NWA agreement by this point. So I think the idea was that they wanted to make the American Heavyweight title less regional, try to accentuate it more as the top belt. So I guess by calling it the World Heavyweight title, it would add a little more value and prestige. Even though it was the same belt that Rude's been carrying around for months. God bless Sunshine. She was working overtime to try to keep these Dallas fans engaged. She's out there doing backflips and handsprings, clapping her hands together and practically begging for the people to actually show some honest-to-God emotion. I mean, in all honesty, there was nothing about this match that gave people an incentive to want to cheer. But that didn't stop Sunshine from trying to work the crowd. It's the typical missing link match we've talked about a gazillion times. He just headbutts everything in sight and runs around the ring like a caged animal. Meanwhile, Rude's just trying to do basic wrestling moves and be an effective heel. It ends with Percy Pringle hitting Link over the back with his walking stick for the DQ. And then, after the heels momentarily took out Link, Percy tries to stalk Sunshine in the corner so he can hit her with his walking stick as well. But then Sunshine ducks it and gives Percy an arm drag to send him ass over tea kettle. That got the biggest pop out of anything in the entire segment. And then Link showed up and speared Rude out of the ring. It's funny how people actually forget that Sunshine was a trained professional. Yeah, she was primarily a valet, but she could work. She wasn't a Rhea Ripley in terms of athleticism, but she could do shit. It was believable seeing her take down Percy in one fell swoop. That was probably one of the biggest bumps Percy ever took in his career. So before the TV main event, they had one of those little video packages to show a bunch of world-class highlights from over the last several years. And because this was world-class on a budget here in 1986, and technology hadn't quite caught up to where it would get in the next 20 years, it basically just looked like an 8-year-old took a bunch of videotape and started playing with filters on an editing software program. So Bush League. My editing is better using iMovie on my MacBook Pro. And that shit was free. That just comes installed on the computer when you buy it. Now, for the people asking me, how far back in the time machine are we going with this footage? Well, we had cameo appearances from Jimmy Garvin, Precious, Stella Mae French. Here's a blast from the past. Bugsy McGraw. Bet you forgot all about him. What was that, late 1982? We had Kamala and Skandar Akbar. Andre the Giant. Can't forget about him. Obviously a lot of Freebird Von Erich footage from 83. They had some strap match footage in there. I don't believe there was any penalty box footage, which disappointed me. But it was a wild several minutes of nostalgia trips to the past. It actually goes to show just how much material we've covered in the last several years. Going back and reliving the entire world-class video library. A lot of talent turnover. That stood out. Wrestlers would come and go in the territory days very frequently. Other than a select big few names, not a lot of guys stayed true to a specific territory or region for the long term. People often forget about that. But it was a fun video. And of course, we had Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts against Kerry and Kevin Von Erich in the main event. I think at this point, you could pretty much call the entire match in your sleep. The one thing you can always count on when it comes to Michael Hayes, it's all fun and games until you try to mock his moonwalk. Then it's on. Shit gets real. I still love that Hayes has to constantly seek validation from the crowd by trying to get them to admire how good-looking he is. And then when the crowd boos him, he gets all bent out of shape. Starts freaking out like a toddler. I think at this stage, even Hayes kind of knew how played out these matches were with the Von Erichs. Now he's just trying to find ways to amuse himself by doing the least amount of work as possible. And a couple of years ago, the story was much different. But now it's like, all right, been there, done that. People have seen it. They know what to expect. We're not reinventing the wheel here. The wrestling was still good, but it's every formulaic paint-by-numbers Freebird Von Erich match we've ever covered. I think the biggest thing that stood out here was how much Buddy had been slowing down by this stage of his career. I don't want to say he looked old in this match. He just didn't always seem on point. Especially when you were watching him run. You could tell he was struggling to keep up at times. I forget what year Buddy retired, but I know it wasn't far too off from this point. Probably a few years, right? I mean, again, the action was fine. We've seen much better between these guys over the years. The heels got to work over Kerry before Kevin ran wild at the end. And while Kerry and Hayes were in the corner brawling, Kevin hit the ropes and came off with a crossbody on Buddy for the 3 count. And then you had the afterbirth where the Freebirds try to get some of their heat back, only to get run off by the babyfaces. To be blunt with you, if you showed this exact tape to anybody that wasn't familiar with world-class history, I guarantee you they would not be able to distinguish whether this match took place in 1986 or 1983. Not to say it's a bad thing, but that is how overdone the Freebird Von Erich matches are. The only thing that would make me even question the dates, and again, this is coming from somebody that's actually recapped the last 4 years of World Class, because of the fact that Buddy still had all of his hair, that was really the only indication to me that this would have been a match that happened later on. That and the fact that Buddy was a lot slower and tired here. But the crowd still fucking loves this match. I mean, they beat this horse to death. People never got sick of it. I mean, that really goes to show the difference between this generation of fans versus the ones we get now. Think about it. Can you imagine a smarter crowd sitting through 4 straight years of nothing but Freebird Von Erich tag matches every week? I mean, they'd have turned on this feud by the time we saw the match 4 or 5 times. We're talking, at the very least, between 25 to 30 matches easily. Maybe more. I'm not even taking into account spot shows or Fort Worth tapings or any of that. I'm just strictly talking sportatorium tapings. Yet this still ended up being the best thing on the entire show. Crowd was dead for virtually every segment, but they still cared about this. Don't even know how that's humanly possible. Well, it's because it's the Von Erichs, but other than that, I don't know. We'll see if they turn it around next week and actually give me some stuff to talk about. Apparently, we're going to hear from Chris Adams. He's been overseas in the UK visiting family for the last month. So we'll get an update on how he's doing and see how his road to recovery is coming along. He's still selling the eye injury from having the hair cream thrown in his face. I think they also announced something with Lance in terms of a featured match. I didn't catch the graphic. Not that it matters because, well, who are we kidding? It's Lance. But we'll cross that bridge next week. Until then, folks, we're going to round out this Friday show. I want to thank everybody for stopping by to check out the podcast. Monday, we'll be back to Retro Raw format. Don't believe we have anything else going on this weekend. I don't know. Like I said earlier at the top of the program, I might try to expand a little bit more on this John Cena WrestleMania conversation. It's one of those things where, again, people are kind of living through the nostalgia of the moment right now, and there are things that I covered on that Monday show about it that I either want to clarify or maybe expand on a bit more. So I'll see if I can throw together some bullet points and do a second segment on this coming Monday show, because I'll have a little bit more free time. But until then, thanks everybody for stopping by, and I'll catch you all soon. Peace out.